Okay, I have to close. Got it. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. And today we will have a rather small group. However, I hope this will make the discussion even more lively around the use of forensic evidence in the fight against torture and other forms of human rights violation. And we will be discussing the work of Independent Forensic Experts Group, IFEG, which is a group that has been with IRCT for how many years now? Over 10 years. And it's the group that comprises of people who are members of IRCT member centers and people like Dr. George Amantevic, who is a professor of forensic medicine at University of Belgrade, former member of the Committee Against Torture. So this is a group consisting of people who are members of the IRCT and also people who are not directly linked to the IRCT, but are involved in this work of providing forensic evidence. And we'll be talking today about why forensic evidence, how it helps to work with the survivors, how it helps to bring perpetrators to justice, how it helps on the domestic level, in domestic courts, and the impact it can have on the international court in certain cases of strategic litigation. And James will correct me, but I think IFEG per year does approximately 12 evaluations. And James will talk more about the composition and the modality, how IFEG works. And this is the first in a series of 3 webinars, which are in different time zones, accommodating the needs of people around the globe. And we hope that after this webinar, you'll have a clear understanding and you will be basically, we are open and we want you to apply to the group, and we are open to help and guide. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Advocacy. I'm currently the president of IRCT, and I'm also the director of the Georgian Center for Psychosocial Medical Rehabilitation of Victims of Torture. I'm a clinical psychologist. And I have been working with James and Georgia for a number of years now in providing trainings and implementation of Istanbul Protocol. And today our panel will consist of Dr. Georgia Amalpevic, as I already mentioned, and Dr. Uju Agomo. Is she here? She's the founder and director of PRAWA, the IRCT member center in Nigeria. And also, recently, she has been elected as a member of the UN Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture. So, James, the floor is yours, I guess.
Okay, great. Yeah, cool. Thanks. It's nice to meet everyone. I guess just because I see a few names of people I actually don't know, which is actually sort of rare, but because I've been at the IRCT for over 10 years now. For those of you who I don't know yet, I'm James. I've been around for a long time, and I lead the investigation and documentation work, including the Istanbul Protocol work that you may have heard of over the last several years or so. As you may know, this webinar, there are only a few people, but that's okay, because actually we have issued this request to join us for this conversation today in connection actually with a request for cases for the Independent Forensic Expert Group to support. As Leila has mentioned, the IFEG, which has existed at the IRCT, and Georgia will speak more about it in a few minutes, is a group of 42 forensic experts from 23 countries, some of the most prominent or experienced individuals in the documentation of torture. And together we actually do between 10 and 20 cases a year, forensic evaluations, forensic documentation, and other things. So for today, what we have planned actually is to introduce or to discuss a little bit what the IFEG is. I'm going to begin with just a very quick 5 or 10 minutes on some cases, just for you to understand what do we mean by when we say forensic evidence, and what is the value or the importance of forensic evidence, and specifically as well then of the IFEG as a forensic institution. Then we will break for some questions. Georgia will talk a little bit. Georgia is on the steering committee of the IFEG, so he will talk a little bit about the work of the IFEG, how it works, and how one does a forensic assessment. Then we will break. Dr. Uju Agomo will provide some experiences from Prava and their important work, both doing rehabilitation and advocacy and documentation work. And then we will, my colleague, who you may not have met, Roberto Ferfrini. Did I say that correctly, Roberto? Perfect. I've been practicing that for 2 months since Roberto joined us. So he is new, a brilliant Italian lawyer. And like all brilliant Italian lawyers, he speaks multiple languages and is working on a PhD. And Roberto will then talk a little bit about how we submit cases, how you might submit cases to the IFEG for consideration, as well as the types of information that are valuable and important. And a little bit about the strategic litigation and what it is that makes a strong case. So with that, I will begin. If there aren't any questions, I see that the Uju is here. And for those who saw the presentation, unfortunately, Dr. Leela Hardy, for those who know her, has a personal family issue and is unable to join us today or the following few days. And Dr. Under Otskulipsi is traveling at the moment. So if you want to see those two, you can just come and join us again at 9 p.m. And Under will be here, and Leela may join the Wednesday session specifically for Africans. So as I mentioned, I just want to present really just 3 cases which are supposed to provide, or hopefully will provide, 3 perspectives on what we mean when we say forensic expertise. And specifically, I guess, what forensic expertise adds to human rights documentation, right? So really what is really special about it. So if I can just share my screen, I'm going to try to do that. Sorry, I was told that I could do this thing where I could share this PowerPoint and be floating in the background, but apparently that's more complicated and difficult than the YouTube video I watched demonstrates. It happens, right?
You can float anyway, James.
Oh, there you are. See? Great. I'm going to go put a positive comment on that YouTube video after this. So forensic documentation, what do we mean? Here you have, on the left side, you have a typical report, or actually the most recent report of Human Rights Watch on Belarus, right, where they talk about the recent incident that happened and occurred in Belarus. As well, we have, I think many of you have seen the Amnesty International, one of their most recent comprehensive reports on the state of human rights around the world. And very often they will talk about the state of torture. They will catalog every country, and as you know, they will talk about, okay, in Thailand, we documented 15 cases of torture last year, where 85% of people reported that they were beaten, and 9% of people reported that they were electrocuted, et cetera, et cetera. Bertha, if I'm speaking too quickly for the interpreters, or I guess interpreters, if I'm speaking too quickly for you, please send me a message.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So that's that. You may have seen that in 2021, 2022, the IRCT, we issued a report on Belarus. And the report was an assessment or forensic assessment of 50 torture cases in Europe. So what does that mean? Well, the forensic assessment, actually composes of 3 analytical layers or 3 analytical approaches. The first one is what you will commonly find both in the Human Rights Watch reports as well as the Amnesty International ones. So of course, the first thing we do is we collect the 50 cases and we do a comparative analysis. Okay, these 50 people, 80% of them were detained, right? 60% of individuals said that they were not fed well during detention. 20% of people were electrocuted. So the principal forensic analysis is very similar, right? We collect the stories or the narratives and we try to compile the information. But there is a second assessment that occurs following that is actually presented in the report. And that is and this is what I think makes when we say forensic evidence valuable, because that is the assessment in each and every individual case of the consistency of the valuable evidence with the individual story, basically to establish how compelling or how much the evidence in each case, right, in each individual story, really compares to and adds value to the individual story. So first we take each individual case, we assess it, based on the quality of evidence, right? So that's the second assessment. And then the third examination, which is also presented, is one where from the evidentiary perspective, right? So here we're talking about medical reports, photographs, videos and such, that we compare all of the evidence of torture collectively, right? From a medical and psychological perspective. Now, why is this valuable? This is valuable. Obviously, the second assessment is valuable because it actually gives weight to each individual story. Whereas very often, you read the Human Rights Watch report or you read the Amnesty one, and in some ways, they don't differ any from a journalistic report in terms of they collect the evidence, they collect the stories, and then they present them, right? First, we will actually provide a forensic analysis of each individual's case, but then the third analysis, right, the one that actually assesses all of the injuries, and this is, for example, an assessment of the type, the extent, the location of the injuries, and how they bear similarities. This is what allows us to make conclusions about, for example, in this report, that compelling evidence of a coordinated policy or practice of torture exists. Because based on simply just an analysis of the photographs, we can see that the bruising bears similarity. And even without knowing the stories of individuals, we can compare the injuries that each individual received, actually in this case in 15 different detention centers, and understand that there was similar treatment by police across 15 different detention centers, across, I believe, if I recall, 11 different cities, right? And individuals had exactly the same types of injuries and even the same bruising patterns, right? And so this is what we mean when we say forensic evaluation. It's not just that, okay, we look and we say, I'm an expert and I see that they are tortured, but it's to add value to or a different perspective on analysis. Now, do you see that?
We see the same screen, James. I mean, the same presentation.
Apparently, I can't. Oh, there you go. So
yes, no.
This is here. You see 2 cases. Actually, you see 3 different photos. You see some colleagues actually from the Media Legal Defense Initiative standing outside the the Economic Community of West African States Court of Justice, right? And here we have some newspaper articles. In 2018, in March, the ECOWAS court, right, that you see before you, issued a statement or issued a judgment in a case of torture victims that we assessed that had escaped from Gambia and were in exile in Senegal. And in this decision, where they awarded actually damages to these journalists who were tortured and abused by a Ghanaian in Gambia, the court actually became one of the first courts to acknowledge and to state that being forced to be in exile was an injury and it was a harm that should receive reparations because of torture, right? That this individual specifically suffered because he was forced to, torture forced him to escape. And his life and any injury or suffering that he experienced while in Senegal, right, not having a job, being away from his family, in fact, having worsening PTSD, was a result of this torture experience. Now, for those who are in, I mean, we understand that in Europe, this perspective is actually quite unique because, you know, I mean, I'm currently in Hawaii, and if people came to Hawaii or they come and they apply for asylum or refugee status in Denmark, the authorities in the States and even the courts assume that having asylum in Denmark is a good thing, right? That having asylum and being in the US and escaping torture is a good thing. But in fact, this court was one of the first to recognize that being in exile is an injury caused by torture. Now, we have two newspaper articles. You may have seen these. Actually, in March 2021, these were issued. And they were issued in the case of a woman called Nazanin. She is a British British citizen of Iranian descent and an NGO worker. She went to Iran to visit her family in 2016. Right, she actually brought her young daughter, who was a baby at the time, to visit her parents. The Iranian authorities arrested her. They tried to basically force her to become a spy. She refused, and she was imprisoned for many years. And there has been a lot of diplomacy over the last 5-6 years in which she was imprisoned to try to get the UK government to pressure the Iranian government to release her. All of this time, the UK government refused to call her treatment at the hands of the Iranian government torture. They said it was unfortunate. They said maybe she was being ill-treated, but they refused to call her experience torture. You know, the IFEG, the Independent Forensic Expert Group, was asked to conduct a remote medical legal evaluation of her over several days while she was at her family's home. So she was released on house arrest and because of COVID, and she was living with her parents. And we were asked to do a remote evaluation of her, both physical and psychological, over Zoom. And we issued a report, which was presented to the government and made public. And in here you see suddenly, this is the Times. So actually the Times is often considered to be the mouthpiece of the UK government. And here you see that suddenly on the front page is a discussion about how she suddenly reveals 5 years later that she was tortured in Iran, as if no one really knew before. And we have an opinion piece also that states very specifically, the government needs to redouble its efforts to secure Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe's release following new evidence that she has been tortured while hostage in Iran. So what is this meant to show? I guess the point is that, very often, because, when we're asked to do a forensic evaluation or we're first approached with a case, the question is always, okay, was this person tortured or not? right? We have some evidence, tell us that they were tortured. Okay, we have a case, we need an expert to say that they were tortured. But the value of a forensic evaluation goes beyond that, right? The real value or the real importance of what the IFEG does and what we mean when we say forensic evaluation and what that does is really to provide a full understanding of the torture experience, a full understanding of the individual's experience. So in the case of Gambia, right, where the individual was in Senegal, the court was able to issue a decision stating that forced exile is an injury caused by torture because we were able to comprehensively document and explain how the individual was still actually suffering during his life in Senegal, right, because of the exile. In Nazanin's case, the same, right? It was only following the release, of a comprehensive forensic evaluation that suddenly the government was willing to admit that she was in fact tortured, right? There was no real new evidence, right? She had been talking about her experience for the last 5 years, right? She was brutally tortured, threatened, abused. She lived in deplorable conditions in a Iranian prison famous for poor conditions where political prisoners are being kept. But still, the government refused to accept it until we were able to issue a comprehensive evaluation, right, which suddenly they call new evidence, right? So that's I guess the second point I was hoping to make. The forensic evaluation really is about pulling together and creating a picture of the torture experience and creating a real understanding that is in fact difficult to ignore for both courts and governments and public opinion. So that's the second point. The third point, I guess, very quickly, is that, this is, you see a photo of Colombia. This is the La Modelo prison. And then, in 2020, in fact, there was a riot at the La Modelo prison because 24 people were killed, 83 were injured. The prisoners were rioting because it was overcrowded, but they were in fact rioting because inadequate measures were taken to protect them from COVID. We conducted an evaluation and reviewed the autopsies of these 24 individuals who were killed. And you'll see actually, over here as well, Human Rights Watch issued a report. And then of course, again, they call it new evidence, right? New evidence, prisoners were intentionally shot, right? It was clear from the autopsies that they were probably intentionally killed during the riots. A few months later, in fact, after we issued this report, and you see here, this is from the news, the prosecutors, the Attorney General's Office of Colombia, began an investigation against the directors of the La Modelo prison. So why is that? What is this meant to show? Well, it's meant to show, the IFEG is a collective institution, very much the same way that the IRCT is a collective institution. And so it functions not only as individuals who are experts, but as a collective advocacy tool. Part of the strength of the IFEG and its effectiveness or its persuasiveness is that the group itself, actually, the group itself between the 42 experts have examined and evaluated over 50,000 survivors of torture. The group itself, the 40 experts, have actually issued, I believe, over 2,000 scientific articles on torture. They have testified in court over 2,000 times. I believe they have done collectively something like 3,000 trainings on the Istanbul Protocol, right? So the group itself has a collective weight. And part of the value of involving the IFEG, right, is very similar to the value of actually the IRCT and the advocacy that it does at the international level, for example, with the UN, at the EU. So it's just that, I'll leave it like that. I hope that was interesting and an interesting beginning or introduction to the IFEG. Do you have any questions or thoughts, comments before we move on to Georgia?
Lisa has her hand up.
Yeah.
Just one quick one, James. Can you explain a little bit about how IRCT coordinate the work of the IFEG members, just briefly?
Okay. Well, I think Georgia will actually talk about that very quickly. So, but as Lisa mentioned, we actually coordinate the independent forensic expert group. It developed based on a project that we implemented in 2012. So actually 10 years ago, in which the IRCT over 3 years actually did evaluations and over medical legal evaluations of almost 100 survivors and 60 different cases. And then together with this group of experts, we created this network. Both to basically to facilitate the membership and other civil society organizations. So the IFEG is, we are the only organization that exists actually in the world that is open to and receives requests from, civil society, so NGOs, both national NGOs as well as international NGOs, often even from the media or the newspaper, sometimes even national human rights organizations, commissions from other countries, and they will send us a request to support them in cases. And then Georgia will talk a little bit about in more detail about what the IFEG does and how it does assessments. Yes, Christina?
Hi, good afternoon from Manila, Philippines, everyone. I'm Christina from the OMCP. And my question might actually be related to Lisa's question as well, or maybe this will be discussed later on. But I was wondering, because we have a litigators group in Africa, in Asia. And I'm wondering if, for example, as you mentioned, say you come up, or the IRCT would come up with a forensic analysis. And how is the coordination done if there is, for example, local litigation? And so would the IRCT, as part of its support, be coming in to testify as well as an expert? And has there been such or kind of event happening where IRCT would be presented in court as an expert?
Thanks a lot. In fact, Roberto and I have been trying to get in touch with the different litigator groups since we issued this call for cases. So we're very familiar with the existence of these groups in Latin America, Asia, and in Africa. When we undertake these evaluations, if they or even issue opinions, we are aware that sometimes there will be this obligation to also come and testify. So we have actually experts have gone and testified at court when necessary. But actually, quite often, most often, the judge hasn't asked us to come and testify in person. But we understand it is a possibility, and we have done that before. So. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Comments?
Can I add one thing before we move on? From my personal experience and from, for instance, GCRT's work with the IFEG and the assistance we have received, these reports are also a very powerful tool for advocacy and also for education, to inform the judges, to educate the judges about the nature of trauma, for instance. Currently, after several cases, we have been approached by the body in Georgia that investigates crimes committed by the law enforcement, basically inhuman treatment and torture committed by the law enforcement, to provide them training on the nature of trauma, and why prosecutors have approached us to provide them with training. To basically, we have been developing a process of trauma-informed access to justice, to structure the process of investigation when the rights of detainees have been violated, also in other cases, so that the process, the questioning on the one hand, and also the procedural issues are victim-centered and take into consideration the nature of traumatic experiences, the neurobiological reactions, etc. So it's a very powerful, and it all started with individual reports or individual cases. So it's a very powerful tool for advocacy and yeah, bringing in this education into the justice system.
Thanks, Leila, for that really meaningful comment. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I hand over the floor to Georgia. Yours.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. Let me just set up my presentation. So I hope you can see now. So I will be talking a little bit from the other angle on what has been already said by James regarding our activities in the IFEG. As you can see, so I will create my story also around Belarus, which has been already mentioned by James, but in his presentation he had used a final product report, namely on what we have assessed in this situation. But I will start from the beginning, how we approach. I mean, because that might be interesting for your future activities in your respective centers. So to once again to underscore that the IFEG is a group of prominent experts coming from different countries. So here you can see one expert who is missing today, our dear friend Onder, who was masterminding the early beginnings of the IFEG, and basically, you already learned that we are coming from different countries, which means that, and also that we are having different professional backgrounds. Namely, in the IFEG, you may find forensic doctors, some of those who are more towards forensic pathology and who can do, let's say, postmortems themselves, and the others who are doing more clinical work, so who are seeing victims of torture and ill treatment. And finally, we cannot live without our psychiatrists and psychologists. I mean, sometimes they are creating a mess with us, forensic doctors. But of course, that's something which we need to fulfill requirements of Istanbul Protocol. Also, it is worth to mention that among the experts in the IFEG, there are quite a number of people who had contributed themselves to Istanbul Protocol as a document. And we have done a lot of examinations, either as the IFEG, but also in our own capacities or with our own organizations, institutions, etc. So cumulative effect of our work is really huge. And it's not only that the IFEG provides medical legal evaluations, but we do something else, and these are expert statements. Then we are doing capacity building and consultations. If you look into a map, then you will see that there is a number of countries in which we have exercised our activities so far. When it comes to medical legal evaluations, James already told you what we are doing and how we are approaching. So we can do individual cases. or a group of cases better, because I mean you have to bear in mind that a deployment of IFEG team is quite a complex task, because you have to bring together several experts coming from different countries. Obviously, there are logistic issues, and of course, costs are not something which can be forgotten, because I mean travel and logistic costs, etc. So why I'm mentioning this, because it is usually better to have let's say few cases. I mean more than one case. Of course, I mean we can be in certain conditions deployed only for a single case examination. And when it comes to expert statement, as members of the IFEG are also affiliated to different universities. So we are keen to produce some papers on topics that are of interest of the group, and not only of the group, but for the let's say different scenarios of violation of human rights. And you may see in leading peer-reviewed journals for forensic medicine and torture prevention that our members are publishing statements from time to time on different topics. And also these topics were somehow identified by the steering committee and by the group itself, and they were surfacing upon needs. So if we come across some case or a group of cases which in which we have been involved, and we found out that there is a missing position statement on a particular issue, then I mean in parallel to let's say managing the case and preparing medical legal report, we would also mobilize our group to work on a statement. Capacity building is something which we are also proud to offer to all the entities that are using our expertise, and it is good to let's say to plan in advance. And for instance, when a team of experts is already deployed to do medical legal evaluation of particular clients or survivors of torture and ill treatment, on that very occasion, we can, once in the country, we can also do capacity building with the local organizations under the umbrella of the IRCT, which is good to increase visibility of local organizations, and also to save resources, because once we fly in somewhere, we can do several activities at a time. And these capacity building issues might be on different topics, of course, under the umbrella of torture prevention and documentation. So in recent past, we have had delivered a number of trainings on let's say torture documentation among asylum seekers and migrants, which is now becoming a major issue in European countries for the time being. Then we can do consultations and then provide our opinion. For instance, like in this case, when there was let's say a police action, at least officially said that it was a police action against a criminal gang, but after a thorough examination of the evidence provided by local organization, we came across that it was a deliberate sort of let's say killings, basically, of criminals without intention to arrest them and to prosecute them accordingly. And now I will come to Belarus just to give you an idea of what was behind the report that was shown by and discussed by James. So at the early beginning, once the crisis in that country surfaced in 2020 following presidential elections, we were astonished to learn from media on widespread police brutality at that time against protesters. And then we were getting in touch with the local human rights organizations, and the situation was very chaotic at that time. And what we have done, we did trainings to online trainings. Remember, that was a situation of COVID, but even without COVID, we would not be able to travel into country in that very situation because it can endanger IFEG members and their own security. So we did online training with several organizations, not only the ones within the IFEG and the IRCT, and aim was to assess the situation through these trainings and through discussions, and to see, I mean, to enhance collection of data from the spot. Later on, these data were used for preparation of the report that has been mentioned. So different partner organizations provided, and their members who are also affiliated with the IFEG provided trainings on different topics. You can see. So we were training people how to collect the evidence from the scene, for instance, at the stage of ongoing protests, what to collect, how to take photos. So you see here title slides of presentation of different people who were involved in this training. We were also because a lot of people were detained, then we were talking about how to collect data from detention centers, how to take photos. This is in Russian because a lot of Russian speakers were there. Some of our members are fluent in Russian, so that says forensic medical photos on this slide. And that was to train let's say lay people on how to do best photos. I mean, photos that can be used for purpose to interpret injuries. And then we understood that there were different organizations on the ground in such a chaotic situation. And each of them were trying, I mean, they were doing their best to collect as much information as possible. But the information was in a completely different format. Like one was, let me use this example, in Chinese, the other were in Russian, the third one were in Swahili, whatever language. And we were trying to get a picture. So, and it would be very difficult and chaotic to translate into a common format, all this. So therefore, we propose a template for all the organizations to collect information in a uniform way, which first of all will enable assessment of this data, but also it will be very useful guidelines for those who are collecting information. And we have developed a template which was produced in English and local Belarus language, and then delivered through all these organizations. So I will not go in details here because it's much beyond the scope of this presentation. But it was very, very thorough to include also body diagrams to enable local NGO staff while they are collecting information to mark some parts of the body that allegedly has been injured, and also to allow people to take the best photos. So these are photos from that project. And why I'm using this opportunity to talk that much about Belarus, because if you have in your country a situation of mass violence, you may wish to consult at early stage the IFEG, you know, to help you at that very moment how to build a strategy to collect documentation, or if possible, of course, to deploy its experts, which was not possible in Belarus scenario. And then we can work together with you, you know, to improve the quality of documentation, to get not only perhaps overall report like what it was done in Belarus, but individual reports that can be then used for litigation and other purposes. Yes, and I will be ending this presentation again with the figures, which are really we have to be proud of, and you can see here from this slide what we have done in figures, you know. So in terms of evaluation of victims, testimonies, papers that are published, and so on and so forth. And we have. It's not only because James is with us, but we should never give up, you know. So, and this is how we are living our professional lives. So, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to ask to answer your questions.
Actually, while people are thinking of questions they want to ask, actually, if we can postpone the Q&A session until Uju speaks. Uju is on her way, and she's about to start giving a commencement speech at the university or a matriculation speech. I'm sorry. Anyhow, she can explain at the university in Nigeria. So she needs to leave us very quickly. So Uju, if we can pass you the floor first, and then we will have Q&A after that.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, James. And thank you indeed for this awesome session, because I think it is really important to understand that there are experts out there, experts from across, you know, the globe. I mean, I was very impressed looking at just the last slide where we have about 23 members from about 23 countries. That's quite high. And I want to just say that being able to show evidence, it's so critical. You know, you can't do this work without being able to show this. You know, sometimes the people who need to change policies, the people who need to really stop the terrible practice of torture, need to understand that this is something that cannot be justified by anybody else, cannot be justified by any kind of practice. There is literally nothing that you can say, I need to torture because of this. And what is the best way really to do this than being able to provide evidence, core evidence? And that's what is key. And this is really the strength of IFEG. And I really doff my cap for you, except that I'm not wearing any cap here now. But to let you understand that if you are doing advocacy, if we're talking to people, once you can show the figures, once you can show the evidence, the mood changes. And that's what's right. Because it then convinces them that you're not just coming to talk because you want to talk. You're not just coming to talk because you want to make noise. But these are facts. And this is the power of evidence, the power of evidence. And this is really what I believe IFEG and IRCT movement have given to the whole work on issue of torture. More so, there is a critical importance for rehabilitation centers. Yes, for you to be able to say, yes, indeed, we have seen these people, these clients come to us. We interact with them. We understand the pain they're going through. We have gone through the trajectory with them, and we can guarantee you that going on having a situation of torture cannot help anybody. So I think on a day like this, there is nothing much to say, but to say thank you to the work that IFEG is doing. That's the way I'm coming. speaking from Nigeria, and I'm speaking for the union. I am in Nigeria, and Abeokuta is on the southwest part of the country. It's the capital of a state called Ogun State. In the next few minutes, I will be heading into an awesome university that is called Christland University, where I'll be giving the commendation speech this morning. But I think that it is key for me to say, let me just spend a little bit of time to talk and share my passion, share my thoughts, share my thanks to the great work that is being done already. Again, if there's anything I want to leave you with, it is that there is power in evidence. If there is anything I want to leave you with, it is that once we can prove it, once we can show it, it makes advocacy easy. And if there is anything I can let you have before I leave, is to say that there is a need to involve rehabilitation centers, there is a need to involve health professionals globally in making sure that the fight against torture is a fight that we will continue until the whole world will be free of torture. And I see a day that will maybe take a little bit of time, but let's just keep doing what we're doing. One more time, greetings from Nigeria, and I am so happy to be asked to be part of this. And meanwhile, by the grace of God, I will be with you again in the evening. Maybe that time I would be able to take a little bit more time to show you examples of some of the things that we have done where evidence really has shown the power that is required, where we've been able to change the trajectory, where we've been able to push reforms, where we've been able to positively and progressively advocate for great changes. But we were able, that only came because we could show evidence. The power in documentation, the power of evidence, the power of rehabilitation centers adding their voice, and the power of health professionals being part of that movement. Again, thank you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Uju, for that very powerful, very quick intervention. I know if you speak like that to these students, they will be all blossoming human rights advocates very soon, and then the IRCT will get many applications for internship. Now, I know Uju, as she mentioned, is on her way to give a talk. So why don't we go back to the Q&A and open the floor again. Do we have any questions or comments for Georgia on the IFEG and how it works and the type of work that it does? Yes, Lisa?
Sorry, I know this is not meant at me, but I'm going to push a little bit. So playing devil's advocate, Jordi, if you're doing in the midst of a very violent situation, as it was in the early days in Belarus, a 3-day training. So for participants on the call, can you explain, is it possible for people to absorb this knowledge in such a way that they can actually use it in their organizations in a systematic way? Just kind of asking the question, a 3-day training sounds fantastic. 60 participants, also a high number. Could you just, give a little bit of perspective there, or maybe some who've participated? That would be helpful.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a really pertinent question, but of course we cannot wait until the emergency situation, like you described in Belarus, emerges. To train people who has no idea and no clue and no previous knowledge. This was more or less training to provide fine-tuning and to put together some pieces of knowledge that we assume that our trainees, our 60, members of that group of 60 people, has already had. And we just try to modulate that in a context of a given unrest and the situation, and to empower them how to make the best use of what they already knew. Of course, you can provide some tips online, but training of let's say of a doctor who does not have any idea how to document ill treatment and who didn't do it on his or her own, or being trained in a spot, let's say concrete cases, or some examples and workshops, etc. It would be very, very difficult. I'm not saying it will be impossible, and but it will be very, very difficult. It's just to draw a parallel with the terrible earthquake nowadays in Turkey and Syria. You know, so if and you can see the difference. Let's say in Turkey they have a system of forensic medicine, and I know from my colleagues that basically they were preparing like even 2 years ago, because there were some information on and some speculation that there might be an earthquake. So if you have trained teams, then they can be more efficient when it happens, you know. So that's the idea. Therefore, it is also important to use the IFEG and the IRCT in terms of daily preparation or trainings, etc. And then, if situation deteriorates in a particular country for particular event, or like in Belarus, I mean, then we know some people to whom we can relay and do some fine tuning.
Thank you very much. Exactly this, the value of the ongoing both training and relationship, right? Knowing who's out there, who's together in this, what qualifications you have, and then being able to tweak it if the emergency strikes or the acute situation is there suddenly. So
Sure.
Thank you for that.
And our role was here in case of Belarus also to assess from distance the situation, and then to try to tailor, let's say, this training to meet the needs as we saw it at the particular moment of the crisis. And it was also a mutual process with our, let's say, interlocutors.
Please, Leila.
Yeah, can I just make a comment to show the other side? I'm remembering now, in 2014, we had a meeting in Tbilisi, James it was an Istanbul protocol training, and we have invited colleagues from Ukraine. And back then the Maidan events had just happened. So there was a lot of violence, a lot of abuse. So this group of colleagues from Ukraine came, and I think they brought several gigabytes of data, of documentation. And it was of no use, because James and Ander reviewed it, and it was not of the quality that would satisfy the courts. It didn't satisfy the forensic standards. So this is the other side of the story, that people tend to document anyway in this big crisis situation. So they need to be properly advised, trained, guided on how to document properly. Otherwise, they could end up with several gigabytes of documentation that is, that does not qualify the standards.
Thanks, Leila. That was very, very valuable input, because if I mean, you imagine one NGO which does a lot of work, invest a lot of effort, and gives a certain hope to the clients, taking photos, doing this, doing that, you know, which at the end of the day will prove to be of a low quality. And it was not done on purpose, of course, by that NGO, but it also further influence the victims as such, and of course the NGO and its efforts. And it's therefore it's easier when you have a problem, consult someone who might. I mean, if that one, let's take IFEG at this moment, says, okay, so this is the right track, go on, and if you need assistance, we can assist you. That's very positive for the NGO. But if someone like the IFEG says, yes, this is an excellent effort, but you should improve here or do in a different way, that's also something which can support local work and bring better results at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think it's a really excellent point. You know, as Georgia mentioned, in fact, when we were in or reviewing cases for Belarus, one of the challenges, in fact, was that you know, people were going and they were sending us, for example, you know, medical reports or doctors' reports to support their claims, but in fact, because the documentation quality was so poor, in fact, the medical reports were hurting their cases or hurting their claims, because they would tell a really horrible story about you know, torture and abuse in the detention center for a day or 2 days, and being beaten for multiple hours. And then the reports that we would receive would say, okay, the person had 1 bruise, you know, 2 centimeters on their thigh. And actually, many of the lawyers that we were working with were sending us these cases because they themselves were not sure then or what to do with this kind of evidence and how to assess it. And they weren't even sure whether or not their clients were lying, because the medical documentation, in fact, seemed to, which didn't document much, seemed to contradict their clients' stories. So, you know, I think I would just mention that very often, in fact, when we do this kind of work, part of a lot of, as you heard from Georgia and Lisa and Leila, is that a lot of the work is also about education. And so through these cases, we try to engage and spend the time to educate, right? Both the medical doctors and our other, you know, partners, such as the IRCT membership and the doctors and psychologists, on how to do good documentation. But on the other side as well, the lawyers and the human rights advocates on how to use this type of information and how to use this type of evidence. And that's also an important component of these kinds of collaborations, is really to understand how to use the medical and psychological evidence in a meaningful way for advocacy. Mm-hmm. So do we have any other questions and comments? Because if not, then moving from that, actually Roberto will go into that in more detail, a little bit about evidence, strategic litigation, and then the types of information that is useful. So, Roberto?
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So, in these few minutes, we'll address what is understood as a strategic litigation from a human rights point of view, from a NGO point of view, why it is important to have a robust forensic evidence when we talk about the strategic litigation, and when we move forward also in terms of public advocacy with international, national, and local institutions. So strategic litigation sometimes is not well understood from lay citizens, because it's something that it's not related to the legal proceeding taking place at the moment, but it's something aiming more to a longer term change in the society, which contributes to the fight against the violation of basic human rights. So as the IRCT, IFEG, we are exposing what is a grave human rights violation as torture and treatment, and we use forensic evidence in our public advocacy in order to bring a longer term change also in policies and laws. It's a strategic litigation. It's strategic because it's aiming at changing the laws and the policies at the international and national level, and it's asking the authorities for a change of approach, for a change of attitude. And it is strategic also because it's not affecting only one victim, but is affecting a broader group of victims, and a successful case of strategic litigation of exposing the crime committed, it's contributing, or it has a positive effect on the community itself. So there are we prepare a strategic litigation file, we generally expect to have three major impacts. Like the first one is aiming to grant justice to the survivors of the human rights abuse suffered, and also that an acknowledgement from the court that their basic human rights have been violated, and this might come as a public apology from the authorities, as a monetary compensation to the victim, but already the acknowledgement of the violation of their basic human rights is an important point and added value for the victim. The second impact that we might identify when using this litigation tool is the effect on the community, because having a positive outcome from a legal proceeding involving torture survivors might help other torture survivors to speak, to expose what they have already suffered, and to denounce the behavior of the authorities, bringing them a bigger change on a larger scale in the community affected by the human rights violation committed by the state officials, by previous states officials. Also, with the strategic litigation, sometimes when we think about the strategic litigation only in terms of national court or national boundaries, strategic litigation in the view of the worldwide fight against torture, it's also something that can contribute to other NGOs, to other medical centers working in the fight against torture, as an example that a case has been brought before a court in a given state, and the survivor has received a public apology, a compensation from the state. So it will be also a kind of push from other CSOs work or medical centers working in other countries to use the strategic litigation tool. So it will the strategic litigation can also contribute to strengthen the whole movement worldwide in the fight against torture and ill treatment, and also to heal the survivor, or to provide to establish a worldwide dialogue among survivors to discuss what they have suffered, and to do not feel alone with their suffering. But what we have to consider, and this is the added value of the forensic evidence, it's sometimes that the strategic litigation is following the times of the justice system. So it's not an immediate outcome, and also it's not an immediate concern for the victims sometimes, because victims who have suffered torture, they are also suffering a psychological trauma. So this might not be their main concern to seek justice in front of a court immediately. And it's also, we have also to consider that torture survivors have to deal also with the psychological aspect of the torture. So the fact of being once released, if they are stigmatized by their own community, they are suffering family breakdown, so they do not know and they do not feel comfortable in filing a lawsuit against the perpetrators. At this point, so taking into consideration all the psychological and physical trauma suffered by the victims, and the fact that there will be a gap in terms of the time between the the events of torture and the fact that the strategic litigation lawsuit has been filed, the importance of forensic evidence is crucial in order to present a robust case in front of a court, or in order to publicly advocate for a reform in the justice criminal system, and also to push for instance, to include to enact a proper anti-torture legislation in given state. And it's for this, the partnership with human rights lawyers, it's important, and it's the knowledge of what is a strategic litigation, the knowledge of what is a torture, and the knowledge and the understanding, as said already by George, the proper understanding of forensic evidence is of paramount importance in legal proceedings. So also for lawyers, there is a need to know how to read a medical legal report provided by, for instance, by the IFEG. But what are the information that are needed from IFEG experts in order to analyze a case, in order to provide an opinion, an expert opinion? So first of all, the centers must provide the IFEG experts with the background of the case, when, what, who, where, and how and why the event happened, who suffered this, and which has committed this, and with the focus on the person responsible of the case and who is involved. But what is also important is for the evaluation from the IFEG is the victim representative of a discriminated or vulnerable group. Does she belong to LGBTQI+ community, to an ethnic minority in a given country, to a religious minority, is she suffering, has she suffered torture because she's belonging to different part of the society, as she, as a woman, suffered different kind of torture, as she suffered harassment because she's a woman, and also what is important, and this is the added value of expertise of the IFEG when analyzing evidence from the ground, from medical centers, is IFEG is always aiming at trying to set a precedent, set the precedent in order to help lawyers to win the case and to start the change of local policies in the fight against torture. And last but not least, the victims are always at the center of analysis of the IFEG expertise. And as we have seen from the James presentation and from George one, it's with new evidence, as said by newspaper or Human Rights Watch reports, we can contribute to the change in public policies, and we can contribute, we can move forward with advocacy at the international and local level. I guess that's it from this.
Thank you so much, Roberto. So as everyone sees, there are a number of things that we like to ask for or discuss when we receive requests for cases. But in fact, if you are interested and you have, we actually have a form that we usually send out. That we ask people to fill in just for us to understand the case more, and then to determine as well whether it's a good case, right? And to discuss really what makes a good case and what makes a successful case. Because in fact, I think the IFEG has been pretty successful over the last. I think actually probably we get pretty positive results in almost 60-70% of the cases that we do, which is I think quite good actually. The challenge being that many cases, especially if they're in court, will take many years for resolution. But it has been very impactful work, which is why we try to do it. Do we have any questions or comments that? On what Roberto, but for any of us or your colleagues, although the period was great. Opoka.
Yes. I don't. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So I'm a journalist from South Sudan, but I'm now resident in the Netherlands. So I had a number of questions, but I can just ask one now. About 2 weeks ago, there was an incident in South Sudan, in the southern part, where armed cattle keepers killed about 27 farming people in a farming community. And when I looked at a lot of the evidence from the incident, the mutilated bodies and a couple of videos here and there, straight away my instinct was telling me that it's not enough. The material was simply not enough because it wasn't done in a very professional way. But listening to the presentation and the emphasis on the quality of the evidence here, it makes me to ask the question: is there a way? Because this conflict between armed cattle keepers and farming communities has been ongoing for a very long time, and so a lot of the question here, for example, in the context of strategic litigation, has any case been brought to any court in South Sudan? Zero. The government says we are going to investigate what has happened, but a lot of these investigations and task force, they never produce anything credible. So nobody has ever been held accountable. But this violence has continued for the last 15, 20 years. So my question is there a way NGOs that are working on human rights issues in South Sudan can be assisted to gather the right evidence so that we can find other forum to push for litigation, whether in the East African Court of Human Rights?
Maybe I can start, and then Roberto, Georgia, Leila, if you want to add anything. Yeah, well, I think just thank you for that for that important comment. It reminds me we should probably be clear. It is always right. It is always good to get good evidence, right? And it always preferred or preferable to get evidence that is collected in a appropriate way, with all of the meeting all of the standards that exist, whether court standards or the Istanbul Protocol or forensic standards. But on the other side as well, any evidence is good evidence. In fact, actually, Georgia and I specialize in reviewing and assessing bad evidence and trying to make it good evidence. No, because that is the reality of human rights work, right? Very often we're getting, when we review photographs of injuries, they're being taken by people's, phones, they're using still like non-digital phones in prisons and sending us photographs of injuries they take themselves, and we quite often we review a lot of photographs actually and videos of evidence taken in protests and riots and other situations. So on the one hand, yes, it is good to be trained and to have good quality evidence, but in fact as well, with training and capacity, it is also possible to interpret and get more information and be able to actually make stronger opinions with what you might consider to be bad evidence. Mm-hmm. So quite often it's so that's one thing. And then as to your question about whether there are ways, actually, we have developed, so we will share with you. Thank you. I see your message in the chat. The form that we send for organizations asking for support, but we actually have also developed forms for documentation to be used by non-medical professionals. We recently, actually, in relation to the protests in Belarus and Colombia, for example, actually developed forms for human rights organizations and even protesters to use to try to document and convey information in a way that is easily interpretable by courts and by experts and others. And so we had many of these kinds of tools also exist. And there are even tools on, there's guidance on how to document injuries or how to take videos well, or take photographs in a good way. So many of these things are also exist, which I'll be happy to share with you after this session. And then to have this discussion, because we have actually been in discussion with many experts and different individuals. Actually, we even have a member center in Sudan at the moment, and we have bin discussing many of the different issues that have been going on and how to collaborate more closely together. So Georgia, Roberto.
Well, as it was discussed before in a context of Belarus, I mean, for South Sudan, we can first of all we need to learn what's going on the ground, basically, and I guess that also one of our prominent members, under whom I have mentioned before, can help, as he was in South Sudan with UN, so he might be aware of situation, and upon some studies on the topics. I mean, we can then come up with the idea how to improve. I mean, how to select among the cases, because some cases might be more useful to be brought to the justice. I mean, I'm not trying to say that not all victims are not here. I mean that they should not access the court and legal remedies, but some cases which are more prominent, of course, can be better, let's say, processed, as lawyers will tell you. And as medical professionals, I mean, we can do a sort of intervention and say, okay, so this should be remedied, or some victims can be re-invited, or in course of their rehabilitation with the centers, we can collect some more information. I mean, there are ways, but certainly I guess that with the experience of the IFEG, we can help to improve to a certain extent the quality of the evidence. And it's also for training purposes, it's also good to learn by doing, so I mean to use the output of previous work of local staff, and to show them how they can make it better. you know, and that's also very, very useful. Because it's always better when you use local cases than when you bring some cases from country XYZ, because sometimes they are not fitting into the context of particular country or situation, etc.
Great, thank you, Georgia. Any other questions or comments? I hope that answered your question, Opoka. Any last comments then, Lisa, Leila, Roberto, Georgia? Otherwise, for the last half an hour, you know, we have, I think Leila has volunteered to do a sound therapy session. She has her Nepali bells or there's also a.
You volunteered for a stretching session, James. So.
Oh, yes. We can all stretch and do a yoga on Zoom, which I guess is popular these days. Okay, well then, with that, you know, well, thank you everyone for coming and for your questions and your time, and for spending your mornings or afternoons or evenings with us, whatever that is. You know, if you have. Berta, can you share our contacts? Or Daniel, you have it, but maybe you can. We'll share our contacts in the chats, and then otherwise, you know, please be in touch. And Lisa will has a final remark for us.
And that is thanks to all these incredible professionals online with us today, and all of you who are on the front line. I mean, I think this is really important to understand that this is an offer, right? This is an offer of support. There's a great community out here who are really committed, professionals, forensic experts, human rights lawyers, medical doctors, and it's an opportunity to collaborate even more in future. So to keep the idea of keep learning and keep your teams, if you're working in an organization, to keep us up to speed, right? Especially with the newest, well, the revised Istanbul Protocol, but it's also to keep this community talking to each other, right? So it is really interesting that the space where lawyers, human rights lawyers, can speak with medical doctors, forensic experts, and be able to help survivors on their journey. So I hope very much that you will come forward if you and your organization have a case, have an idea of something you need some support on. This is the offer to you and to those who are on the call. And if there are other organizations that you know need this kind of support, James, I look to you guys, but I assume we are willing, and this is kind of the uniqueness of this offer, right? We're willing to look at cases, so please bring them on. So thanks very much for spending this time with us today, for all of you who prioritize this time.
Fantastic. And with that, have a good rest of the day, everyone. And don't forget your stretches, as Leila would say.
That was your idea, not mine.
Okay, I think that Carmen wants to say something. She has raised her hand.
I know she was clapping, I think. Yeah.
Ah, clapping. Okay. So still she has to say something, yeah? I mean, to clap.
Okay.
Anyway.
Ciao.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.